Hello everyone. This is the first video lecture of week 12 lectures, and this week we're focusing on the city of Jerusalem, particularly during late antiquity, between 4th and 8th centuries AD, or in the Common Era. Last week we finished our row of Near Eastern cities in the Mesopotamian history. And all of these cities, from Uruk to Nippur, from Babylon to Persepolis, were somehow connected to each other in terms of a certain level of cultural continuity or genealogical relationship. This week we're actually taking a leap and going beyond the Hellenistic period, beyond even the Roman Empire, and looking at a time period that is transitional from the end of the Roman Empire, from the kind of economic collapse of the Roman Empire in the Mediterranean world, to into the medieval periods. That is, and that's the transitional period that we call late antiquity, basically the last phase of antiquity before we get into the medieval period. This is indeed a very dramatic change in the shape of the cities, how cities were built and how cities were managed. If you remember from the very beginning of our class, in the first couple of weeks, we talked about, when we were talking about cities in the long-term perspective, we divided up and talked about ancient cities as the open city. And you've written about this in your essays as well, the idea of the ancient open city being very well connected, very intimately connected to the countryside around it. And we talked about how the fortifications that were built for the ancient cities were less for sort of protection and war purposes, but more as an enclosure. Whereas when we moved to the medieval city, if you recall, we talked about a closed box, where we have formidable fortresses, soaring cathedrals, well-fortified military towns, with moats and walls surrounding them. So a kind of a military protection of the city became very important. So we're looking at Jerusalem right in that transition from an ancient city of antiquity to a medieval city, and it's somewhere in between. So where is Jerusalem? We looked at all these cities in the past, covered sort of from prehistory in southern Mesopotamia to Iron Age cities in Anatolia, in Assyria, in Persepolis, in Iran. And finally, we made it to Jerusalem. As you can see, all of the previous cities were in some kind of a relationship with each other, particularly many of them, with the exception of Hattusha, in the Mesopotamian Tigris-Euphrates basin. We are now going to the Mediterranean coast, close to the Mediterranean coast, into the area known as the Levant, or the Levantine cities, the famous mercantile Levantine cities of the Mediterranean. Next week we will move to Constantinople, modern Istanbul, and then finally we will finish with Cairo as our example for an Islamic city. So where is Jerusalem? Jerusalem, also known as Al-Quds or Kudus, is located on the Levantine coast of the eastern Mediterranean, on the plateau of the Judean mountains, located between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea. As you can see in these maps and satellite images, It was, as you know, it is a major city of conflict these days. If you are following the news in the last several years between the State of Israel and the Palestinian communities, both the Palestinian Authority and the State of Israel claim Jerusalem as their capital city, while neither claim has been recognized internationally. Although you'll recall Donald Trump making a statement of recognizing Jerusalem as a capital, as the capital of Israel as well, which was a you can see why this kind of political move is significant for himself. So we're looking at Jerusalem as a complex city with layered histories of the three Abrahamic religions, the three monotheistic religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Multiple foundational or rather genealogical stories about these three religions are alive and vibrant in the city of Jerusalem as a holy city and as a place of pilgrimage. In various parts of the various episodes of the history of these three religions. And each of them have left architectural remains, architectural monuments were built to commemorate particular episodes in these religious histories. So this is kind of really our interest this time, to look at Jerusalem as a place of pilgrimage and as a holy city, and as a palimpsest. This is also, let's look at, and we're also going to ask questions of, discuss questions of the city as a palimpsest, and I will explain what I mean by that, as this is one of the authors that we're reading, Annabelle Worthen, has referred to, as well as understanding Jerusalem as a contested place. We want to ask, why is Jerusalem such a contested place? That's one of the questions that we will pursue. So let's look at the three objectives of this week that kind of roughly corresponds to the lectures that I'm delivering this week. The first one has to do with Jerusalem is a city of memory and desire, where multiple histories of these three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, intersect. And we want to think about it as some kind of a sedimented and layered history. I mean, this is a history that is so full of, this is a city, this is an urban landscape that is so full of architectural remains of different episodes within the history of these three religions. And this conflict that is centered around Jerusalem goes all the way back to the Roman destruction of the Jewish temples, all the way to Crusade. So it's really it's also a very troubled history with lots of violence. We're also going to include the question of what is pilgrimage, and understand Jerusalem as a place and destination of pilgrimage. And if you recall, in one of our discussions, we talked about the city of Nippur as a site of pilgrimage as well. So we had already started the discussion of the idea of pilgrimage and the city as a site of pilgrimage there as well. So I'm going to bring up some of those ideas from there. In the second lecture, we're going to look at the historical context of late antiquity, particularly this time period between 4th and 8th centuries AD. And we're going to talk about what is late antiquity, and what is the nature of these transitional periods that allowed Jerusalem to flourish as a city of significance. From particularly the collapse of the conversion of the Roman Emperor Constantine to Christianity, all the way to the rise of the Umayyad Caliphate and the Islamic takeover of the Middle East, and as well as Jerusalem, and we'll see that as well. In Jerusalem, and in the third lecture, we'll look more closely at Jerusalem in late antiquity, and look at questions of urban landscape and memory, and understand this urban landscape as a kind of palimpsest and assemblage of memory places that are associated with particular important events, important religious histories in the city. And here I'm going to argue that, and this is something that we've discussed in previous lectures as well, this idea of memory not as an individual act of remembering, but a collective, creative, material act of reenacting, as a kind of a creative production rather than a passive remembering. And this is also something that we're going to come back to. Byzantine Jerusalem, this is a rough sort of map of Byzantine Jerusalem with the important monuments that are marked on it. And of course, this time period, we're going to understand it as a time period of flourishing for the city, when it's recovering from all the suppression, or the rather harsh suppression of the Roman imperialism that it experienced from, particularly from the first to third centuries of the common era, and we're going to look more closely at this urban landscape. That has features of also of a Roman provincial town, but also a way that it has recovered from that as well. And this is kind of really the landscape we're going to come back. This is a reconstruction, perspectival reconstruction of the core of the fortified part of the city, with the Temple Mount on the right. And a major sort of large Roman street, colonnaded Roman street that crosses the entire city north-south, leading from the Damascus Gate to down to a number of churches in the south. We're going to discuss the structure of the city as well in that sense. So the Roman era, although very oppressive, it has also transformed really materially the city itself. So let's go back to this idea of the Holy City. We compared Jerusalem before to other cities in holy cities in the modern world, and places of pilgrimage as well in ancient and modern worlds. For example, ancient Delphi, which was a center of oracle, where people went for pilgrimage to understand their communities or their own families, their future. So basically, it's an oracle, it's an Apollo sanctuary that many people have traveled in antiquity. Likewise, in the cases of the Vatican and Vatican City, which is a very sacrosanct place of Catholicism. It's an ecclesiastical state within the city of Rome itself, a very important place for Christians in Rome. As the head of Catholicism, it holds very important religious sites of the St. Peter's Basilica, the Sistine Chapel, and the Vatican museums. And so people, thousands of people, pay tribute and go pilgrimage to the Vatican. And similar case with the Mecca in Saudi Arabia, where the Hajj, which is the Islamic pilgrimage, is actually built into the structure of the requirements of practicing Islam. Different scales of pilgrimage happens, a kind of a short one, a longer one, that are deemed essential for every person, every Muslim to do once in their lifetime. So what is pilgrimage? I've shown you this image, which I really like very much, the pilgrims at the rock churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia, which was very interestingly designed in the 12th to 13th century of the Common Era as the New Jerusalem. So it's planned, the plan layout of this city of churches was modeled on Jerusalem itself. I'm showing you as both as an example of this kind of the idea of pilgrimage, but also as an example of the power, the really strong historical impact of this, the city of Jerusalem itself. Here are some pilgrims at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and you can see this really bodily, embodied engagement with architecture and surfaces of the holy places, and what kind of an emotional engagement that we're talking about when we talk about pilgrimage, right? And so you see graffiti carved on the columns, on the stone columns of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that we're seeing. So this kind of, the graffiti is part of this idea of leaving a trace of both going to these holy places, but also leaving your traces in them. And so this photograph also is meant to illustrate that pilgrimage is, in a way, leaving personal, intimate traces in holy places. And I'm showing you graffiti from the medieval pilgrims and crusaders at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the form of thousands of little crosses carved on the rock, on the ashlar blocks of the church's walls. And so so pilgrimage is basically a journey that one takes to visit a holy place, or rather a series of holy places, sites of pilgrimage on a particular route. So such as sacred shrines, holy springs, and so on. With different goals, and some have ideas of getting healed if you're suffering from a disease, a desire for salvation, or simply fulfilling the requirements of a religious belief system. Such is often the case with Hajj in Islam as well. The travel itself is significant as a transformative experience. It's essentially a late antique and medieval experience, especially in association with the rise of the holy men, saints, and with shrines, miracles, and sites of miracles associated with them. It also comes with a very complex material culture of I'm showing you some examples like a pilgrim's flask, or a portable icon. The pilgrim's flask is for sort of for holy water, bringing holy water from the site of pilgrimage. Portable icons as powerful and protecting materials, portable relics, reliquaries that go with this. So this is all the powerful objects you travel with during your pilgrimage. And I would like to sort of really end. And what are these places that people visit? A really good example of this is the Cave of the Seven Sleepers. It's an important story that's found in many of the holy books, in the Quran, in the Bible, and this idea of the seven sleepers who slept for about 250 years. and that there are several caves around the Mediterranean that are associated with this interesting episode, this miraculous episode of a group of people and a dog sleeping for about 250 years, and these places become holy places to visit. And I'm showing you another cave. This is also associated in is a holy place in Islam. It's associated with the life of Prophet Muhammad, when he and his companion Abu Bakr were running away from their persecutors, the Quraysh tribe, and while they were migrating to Medina, they hid in this cave, and by miracle they were afraid to be caught. By miracle, a spider spun a spider web at the mouth of the cave. So when the Qurayshis came, they saw the spider cave and did not think that Muhammad and Abu Bakr had entered this cave, and so they moved on. So this spider actually saved the idea of the spiders saved them from persecution, and so the site of this particular cave then has become a place of pilgrimage to visit. So I am going to end my presentation here just to illustrate to you these ideas of holy places, in particular architectural, natural places, and architectural places that are actually places of pilgrimage. I will end this image from Jerusalem, from a wall called the Wailing Wall, which is in fact the western wall of the Temple Mount, which I always find this as a kind of a most fascinating example of a holy place. In Islam, it's called Al-Buraq Wall. It's a limestone ashlar masonry rectangular wall erected as part of the second Jewish temple by Herod the Great, encasing the natural hill of the Temple Mount. And this is also the west border of Al-Haram al-Sharif. It is called the Wailing Wall because of the practices of the Jews who wept for the historical destruction of the temple during the Christian and Roman rule in the 3rd through 6th, 7th centuries. The pilgrims write messages in small pieces of paper and stick them into the cracks of the wall. This is also a holy place for Islam, as it is understood as the site where Prophet Muhammad tied his horse, Burak, his winged steer, in just the night of his miraj, his ascent to heavens. This architecture is such a powerful example of a 3,000-year-old building, a 3,000-year-old architectural wall that continues to be visited and venerated as a very meaningful place, approached by the pilgrims and associated with particular practices, particular religious practices and meanings, and people cry in front of them, in front of this wall. So this kind of an emotional engagement with an architectural piece is rare, and I leave you with that in thinking about the significance of Jerusalem and the emotional density of being in that holy city.